In the last video, we got this motor pulled out of the car because we're running into some compression issues, and it's time to get this motor stripped down to figure out what our problem is. So before we start to be able to pull the heads off to figure out what's going on, we gotta make sure we strip everything off. We've done a pretty good job so far, but we still have the headers, all the timing components, and a few oil and coolant lines before we can pop the valve cover off and take out the head bolts. So without wasting any time, let's get right into it. So before I start stripping off all these timing components, I need to make sure that the engine is in time before I start doing so, which I think it already is. But if it wasn't, you'd be looking for a few things. There is a notch on the top of the pump here. Then you have notches on all of your cam gears. So you have one on the top that lines up with this piece right here. You have two in the middle, and then you have one on the side, and then same for the other side. One up top, two in the middle, and one on the side. Okay, so in an attempt to not make an absolute mess everywhere, I failed, clearly. Technically, you're supposed to remove the front timing cover in order to get the dipstick out, in order to get the oil pan off easier. I decided not to do it that way because I want to get the oil pan off before I stripped everything down, just because if we're gonna see massive engine failure, we're gonna see it down here in the short block as soon as I pull the oil pickup tube and this baffle off. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then we can look inside and see if we see anything. Actually, there's not any metal shavings in there at all. It looks completely fine. So that is a good sign, but I still wanna double check. I really don't think it's the bottom end. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this bottom end is still salvageable. I think it's definitely gotta be something in the head. Hopefully it's the head gasket or a valve or something like that. Gotta just pull the head off because both the oil pan and inside the actual case are totally fine. From what I can tell, I mean, the oil pan is spotless. There's not a single fleck of metal in the oil pan, which is good, which means that we can most assuredly reuse this short block. Now, these AVCS cam bolts are notorious for stripping out, so we're going to be careful with them. Now there's a trick that Smedia uses, and that is to put a little bit of valve grinding compound in there. Oh, there we go. All right, one down. Okay, so I have all of my timing components organized here. So it's finally time to start to pull the head bolts out. Over here, I have a 14mm 1/2" star socket on a 1/2" breaker bar. I hope this is enough. These are easier than the cam bolts, I'll tell you that. Way easier than the cam bolts. Doesn't look like the head gasket failed. Guys, I'm genuinely stumped. I have no idea. So I went through, I pulled out the valves, pulled off the cams, checked in the valves, checked the valves themselves and the springs, checked inside the cylinder and the head gasket, and there's nothing that's like glaringly obvious. There's no major scoring on the cylinder. There's no, like, the head gasket looks fine. It's not like obvious that it's a head gasket failure. Cam journals look fine. The cams themselves look fine. The lobes look fine. The valves, none of the valves are burnt. They're dirty as hell, but none of the valve springs are cracked. The retainers look fine. None of the valves look bent. I mean, maybe there's like such a small bend in one of them that I can't even see it with my own eyes, but it's like for such low compression in one of the cylinders. And I ran the test multiple times just to double check before I ripped this whole thing out. I ran the test multiple times and consistently it was 60. So I don't think it's the tester. I know I bought the tester from Harbor Freight, but a PSI gauge is a PSI gauge. I will say though, shout out this Company 23 tool. It genuinely makes this so easy. It makes it like dumb simple. Also, their cam wrenches over there make this process dumb simple. So at least I haven't been having problems disassembling things, but I would almost rather like have an issue. Now I'm not even gonna say that. I'm not even gonna put that in the world. But I would almost rather have like a glaringly obvious, like, oh, there's scoring on the cylinder wall, ringland failure. Oh, there's metal in the oil pan. Something broke. Or, oh my gosh, the valve is bent in a 90-degree angle, which would not happen, but you get my point. This like mystery game of like, I have no idea what's happening with this car. It's irritating. It's very frustrating. And what I also don't want to do is I also don't want to put everything back together, put this motor back in the car, and have the same exact problem. Man, this is annoying. The only thing that I could possibly think of is it looks like the exhaust valve seats. There's not a clean seat. Like, they're dirty. There's carbon buildup. That's the only thing I can think of right now. But would that little buildup cause compression in cylinder 4 to drop to half? I don't know. I just don't know. I need to get a second opinion. Okay, so last night I took the chance to get these cylinder heads packaged back up. I figured there's only one more option left, and that was to pull the piston. So took it down to my tuner and we pulled the piston together, and well, I think we found our issue. I really don't think it's the bottom end. Not supposed to be like this. So it basically means that this bottom end is toast. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to rebuild this specific bottom end. If I'm gonna build it, I'm gonna build it in the way I want to, but all I know right now is that it's gonna be expensive. So at least we now know the problem. It was ringland failure, which is, it's still kind of surprising to me, and maybe this is how it happens sometimes, but when I pulled the oil pan, there was nothing in the oil pan. So that's why I kind of figured that it, like, the likelihood of it being something bottom end was a little bit lower. Maybe I'm just used to seeing bearing failure where you see a ton of metal shavings in the oil pan and basically the entire oil system is compromised. But this is probably the best case scenario for a bottom end failure, and it only means that we go stronger from here. I'm gonna have to kind of think about how I want to go about this. I'm kind of thinking about building it in stages, so building the block and then doing a turbo kit later, something that I know is going to be bulletproof for a long time, and just doing a simple stock turbo and flex fuel build. I don't know, it depends on how much it's going to cost. And this is kind of the reality of building Subarus, is bang for your buck is non-existent. These cars are expensive to make power on. This isn't like a B58 where you just throw a downpipe and an E50 tune on and you make, you know, 400 or 500. So I'm gonna have to think about how I wanna do this. I really wanna do this right. I wanna build something that is A, I have faith that is not gonna explode again, and B, something that is fun to drive. I don't wanna just rebuild it back to stock, because what's the point? We did all this work, all this effort to tear down this motor, might as well build it the way you wanna build it. But at the same time, pouring, 20, 30 grand into a car doesn't make a whole lot of sense, at least for me right now. Well, what do you guys think? Where should we go with this build? I'm definitely gonna have to send the heads off to get machined out. We also measured the valve tolerance and the valve lash, and it was totally out of whack, so the valve seats need to be done. Let me just look at this. Totally smashed. I pulled it from the cylinder, or the case half, and it just like crumpled in my hand. It is crazy to me because this is a Type R A block, and so I thought that the Type R A blocks were a little bit stronger than the 2015 to 2017 blocks. I don't know what happened. It's still crazy to me that this was a 30K mile motor that was basically stock. The only thing it had was an intake and an AOS and ringland failure. I don't know, who knows? I guess at this point it doesn't really matter. The damage has been done and it's time to build and make it stronger from here. But I think it's gonna be it for this video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. How should we build this out to be? But with that, we'll see you in the next one.